Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, blockbuster classical action, I'm going to talk about the Iliad by Homer. So as you may know, if you've watched the channel for a while, I have embarked on a project to read the 12 classic books that Michael K. Vaughan listed in a video he did a little while ago as kind of essential classics you must read. He did put the inverted commas himself around that must. And it's been an interesting experience so far. So I read Moby Dick last month, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I thought it was an excellent book. This month I read the Iliad, which I enjoyed less. So let me talk about my feelings about it. So in terms of background, so it was written, it's old. So it was written in the 8th century BC or thereabouts. And I read the translation, which I think is from the 50s or 60s by Evie Rue, which has been kind of updated a bit more recently. So I think there was a revision done in like the 90s or something like that. So it's a prose translation rather than a poetry translation. The Iliad obviously originally was an epic poem. Some of the translations try to maintain that poetical nature, and some of them are prose translations. And I chose to read a prose translation because I'm not a huge fan of poetry. And like I say, it was okay. I kind of enjoyed it. I enjoyed parts of it more than others. And I think my big takeaway from it was that your expectations going into a book can very much shape your enjoyment of a book. So in some ways I enjoyed this more than I expected to, but in other ways I felt like it let me down. So the Iliad obviously is about the Trojan War, so about the Greek army travelling to Troy and attacking that city, besieging that city in order to try and get Helen of Troy, who has run off with Paris, who's one of the Trojans, trying to get her back and get her to go back to Greece with them. So what did I enjoy more about it than I expected to? So it was a lot more action-packed and enjoyable in that sense than I expected. So I expected it to be quite dry. But in fact, it's got tons of fighting in it, which I suppose, given it's a story about a war, shouldn't be that surprising. And that fighting was often quite entertaining. It's very gory at times. The fighting is really graphic. And what's interesting as well is Homer seems to insist on naming everybody that dies. So you get, I don't know if they're chapters exactly, but you get sections that are called things like Achilles kills 8 Trojans. And then, the next few pages aren't literally just Achilles going at the Trojans and killing a few of them, and you get a tiny bit of backstory and a name for each person that he kills. But he there's disembowelings, there's beheadings, there's all that good stuff. So the action is genuinely quite entertaining, and it reminded me, you've got these big heroic figures, like Achilles. And it reminded me in some ways of a kind of, Marvel Cinematic Universe, kind of movie, in that sense of having these big, larger than life heroes, and a cast of other characters who are there basically just to get beaten up. So that side of it I enjoyed more than I expected to. Where it let me down was that it's really repetitive. It is literally just a bunch of different scenes of one of the heroes having fights with people. And whilst it's dramatic and enjoyable, and I can totally get how a contemporary audience, so a Greek audience listening to Homer or whoever, relaying this story, would have been entertained by it. It's full of action, it's full of adventure, and presumably you wouldn't have read or listened to the whole thing in one go. You might have got like an hour a night or something like that. So it feels quite episodic and very much like a TV show. It's like an action-packed TV show that you consume as an audience over a number of nights. So I totally get why it was popular at the time. And I suspect if I'd been around back then, I would have lapped it up. I think I would have absolutely loved it. But it is repetitive, and the plot is, reasonably slight. There's not a great deal of anything interesting in the plot. It is just, the besieging of Troy. And what's also slightly weird for me and disappointing about it is I went into it expecting a fully formed work. So I expected to hear the whole story of the Trojan War from, Helen running off at the start, that being the event that kickstarts the Trojan War, and then, the Trojan horse at the end. I was expecting that with, the rest of the story sandwiched in the middle. And actually you don't get that at all. So it felt to me often, particularly in the first third or so, like I was watching, the second film in a trilogy or something like that. So you feel like there's a ton of backstory that you're just not filled in on at all, that you're assumed to know. And clearly, I guess people at the time would have known it. And I'm sure many people reading the Iliad today do what I didn't do and do their research and, read up on the background. So they know the kind of run up to the story. So that was a bit disappointing and meant that it felt like the story had a bit less weight because of that. And then the other thing is, there's no bloody Trojan horse. So there's no Achilles heel. There's no Trojan horse. I genuinely felt shortchanged. And again, had I researched things a bit, no doubt I would have known that I wasn't going to get those things. But I was like reading it, thinking, okay, all these fight scenes are quite fun, but the story needs to move on. We must be getting to the Trojan horse soon. And I realised I was quite near the end, and I was like, where's the Trojan horse? And then it just ended. And I was like, okay, so no Trojan horse then. I was genuinely really surprised by that and felt a bit let down. So, my expectation meant that I was expecting, this big climactic, wonderful trick at the end and didn't get that. And that then, therefore felt quite disappointing, to be honest. So yeah, I read every book I read in basically the same way, which is probably a failing on my part. But be it classical literature or a Mac Bolan men's adventure book, I expect to pick up a book and have basically what I need contained within those pages for me to get the most out of the book. And with the Iliad, that definitely wasn't the case. I felt like I would have enjoyed it more if I'd done homework, but I'm not the kind of person who does homework in order to read a book. So I totally get why it's considered important. Clearly the fact that it has persisted for nearly 3 millennia as a story is incredibly impressive, and its place as one of the first kind of long documented stories is fascinating and really cool. But as a piece of entertainment, I didn't enjoy it overly much. I'm sure people back in the day thought it was fantastic, but yeah, it wasn't really for me, if I'm honest. I'm glad I've read it. I don't regret reading it. A lot of people have said in the comments to other videos where I mentioned it that the Odyssey is a lot more fun. It's got more sex, it's got more monsters and stuff like that, and it's shorter. So I may well give the Odyssey a go. I've got it on my Kindle as well. So yeah, I may give that one a go. I suspect that's got more of the kind of Clash of the Titans vibe that I look for in my classical Greek literature. So yeah, the Iliad fell a bit flat for me, but yeah, I'm glad I read it. So time for a random book from the shelves. I thought I would pluck something completely different from the Iliad. So I've got Imp by Andrew Needleman, the trashy horror writer who is now VC Andrews. So I've read a couple of Needleman's books from the 80s, and one of them I really quite enjoyed. The other one I didn't enjoy quite so much, but this one looks pretty good. So yeah, looking forward to reading this at some point. So I hope you enjoyed that. Do let me know your thoughts on the Iliad if you've read it, and let me know if you think I should read the Odyssey. As I say, there was a lot in there that I did enjoy, but overall it felt like a book that has had its day, shall we say. So yeah, anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're safe and well out there. I hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.